tell them it's in the shul.
It's
not, we're not davening tonight. We're moving to upstairs to the side room.
Okay, great. All right, so, but I'll see what I can put together for that. I haven't heard anything yet from the other crews.
No
So.
cookies today, Bob.
By the way, I'm coming back. You're a cookie.
I'm coming
In
back
the
for
shul's bulletin.
You
Just tell them.
That's a good move.
You're in the light.
Oh,
I'm getting people to go to the shul.
Morning, Marvin.
Good morning. That's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, gentlemen, as far as I know, I haven't had a chance to really speak with David Cheslow for sure. But as far as I know, we should be doing our learning in our normal order, okay? It's just that we will have to do our shiur after davening in the morning, right?
Yeah.
That's what you've been doing.
Right, but I'm saying it's going to run, davening is Chol Hamoed, it's going to, and Yontif, it runs, on Yontif, I would assume we would do more like the Shabbos schedule, okay? That's what we've done, but on Chol Hamoed, if you're here, we'll do it in the morning after the davening, but that davening, remember, runs a little longer. So, okay, so I will double check with David on that, okay? But otherwise, okay, Zev, okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me start with our learning sponsors and then we'll pick up. Okay. A Year of Learning by Sue and Arnie Garelek in memory of Malcolm Perlman and Philip Mann. Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch Beryl ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch. Mayor ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Henya Rivka Pro-Rosner ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch. In memory of family murdered in the Holocaust, Arav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Sedell, Irving and Pearl Kaplan. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov in her memory. Charlie Gelfenstein and Sam Levine in memory of Ramona Levine, Rachumata bat Asher. Friends of Nina Monester, Nechama Asna bat Yitzchak Aharon. Let me just make sure they.
Our flight's at 150. Your flight's in the morning?
Right. Where is it? Okay. Many friends of Stephen Vigdal, Ezecher Nishmat Simcha Melech ben Meir Leib Halevi. Friends of Marcy Kurtz in memory of her great niece Leah Bracha. A month of learning by Lydia and Abe Krause, as many friends in honor of their 50th anniversary. A week of learning by David and Sharon Karpel, Rabbi Tzvi and Robin Karpel, in memory of David and Tzvi's mother, Malka Bas Mordechai. Dr. Mark Scher, in memory of his father, Mordechai ben Menachem Manish. Ruth Kosman, in memory of her husband, Shmuel ben Yitzchak. Carol and David Kaplan, in memory of Hannah and Ron Goldberg's daughter, Tamar Yenta bat Yerachmiel Yitzchak. Today is the 13th, right? Yes. A day of learning by Hetty and Terry Augenbraun, in memory of her mother, Edith Bas Yosef. Okay. And Shema's Heavenly, Cranker Fia, Velti Yeshua Shema Tzliya, and Mechol B'nai Israel, a good Gabench Yar. Okay. There will be only, by the way, one bulletin for the 2 Shabbatot of Pesach.
Okay. Tomorrow?
It should be coming out hopefully tomorrow, right? Okay.
Gold is coming out today.
Today?
Today, they told you? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So today's Gemara is Lamed Zion. Does that sound good?
Zion.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. So on the top of that Amud, we saw the Gemara says, really, Ba'orta amar Rabba hachi u'betzafra hadarbe. Okay, and then that's where we ended off. That he gave it. So how did you understand that two different individuals would give different explanations of Rabbi Yochanan? Okay, Rabba's statement. Okay, explaining Rabbi Yochanan. That was the attempt that the Gemara gave us. Okay, to explain that issue. So Gemara picks up, and as we continue, we're going to see a couple of items that we need to sort of comment on. Okay, Amarle Shritu. So the Gemara asked, did he really consider being willing to paskin that he would be permitting? Okay, so the Gemara says, this is the response. Yehe Ra'ava the Tishtaru af Tarba. May it be ultimately that at some time you'll permit the fat of an animal. In other words, if you're willing to permit that, it's hard to say. When I looked at the explanations, just the one I have here.
Wasn't happy.
Well, that's the issue. In other words, okay, that they didn't go in. V'sha'al Rav Ashi at Rabbi Yoshia Bereta. Okay, in other words, was this a criticism? Okay, in other words, is that how we are to understand it? That this was a criticism, that he would even think at some point such a situation would be permitted, or was this, halavai, that at some time, that it could be that we wouldn't have to worry about such issues and things like that.
Jewelry.
Okay, all right. Then my impression was, after looking at it more than once, to have a feeling this was a bit of a criticism. Okay, so what happens? Hacha gabe me'uberet. Okay. Okay, here we're talking about a pregnant woman. All right, chavero. All right, remember we said that there were two issues: the pregnant woman of a friend or colleague, and a nursing woman. Do you marry them? You don't marry them. Okay, that was the point, right? Hacha gabi me'uberet chavero umineket chavero hanisua lekohen mai. Okay, so if we said that basically they were more lenient, this was Rava's explanation, more lenient regarding the Kohen, okay, because we were concerned in those situations where we require a takana of chalitza, okay, that she would have to do it, then he could never take her back. So the implication would seem to be maybe in those cases the rabbis were going to be more lenient, okay, that he didn't have to divorce her, okay. Mi avud rabbanan takanta the kohen olo. Would the rabbis then ever do that kind of a gzera takana, okay, for kohanim in their situation or not? Amarle hachi hashta. He's saying basically, how can you compare these examples, right? Bishlema hatam kivan deika rabbanan de plige ale de Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Since it's very clear that in that case, there are some that disagree with the view of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Da'amre, they say, afal gav de lo shaha vlad ma'alia, okay? Even though the progeny may have been such that I'm going to say it was a viable for more than 30 days, right? Have gabe eshet kohen kevan de lo efsha, okay? Avdinin karabanan. That maybe in that situation, okay, since it would not be possible for a Kohen to retain her as his wife, maybe there the rabbis would have made a takana in that unique situation, okay, and he would follow the view of the rabbis. Aval hacha, but in the case then, which we said earlier of the pregnant or nursing child of another man, Kemana Avid, would they really do it in that situation? Ika Rabbi Meir, if it's according to the view of Rabbi Meir, Ha'amar Yotzi v'lo yachzir olamit, Remember Rabbi Meir, who says the Gemara is reminding us that he said they must put her out, in other words, divorce her, and can never take her back, right? Ve'ika Rabbanan. Or maybe it was going to be according to the view of rabbis, Ha'amrei Baget, who would say that they must put her out with a get. You must give her a get. Okay? Now, what's the difference then between Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan? He can give her a get. Certainly an Israelite could give her Israel could give her a get. Okay? But if ultimately he could theoretically take her back, could remarry her, not so for the Kohen. Itmar, about this, the following, however, was said, right? Namely, Kadsha betoch shlosha ubarach. Okay, so now we seem to be citing another bright that says if a man became erusin, I'm going to use that term, okay, with this woman, okay, within the 3-month period that she was supposed to be waiting, and then he fled, he left, okay? Okay, what does that tell us? Plige ba Rav Acha v'Rafram. 2 of the sages had a machloket about that situation. What does his having become engaged, formally, I'll say, engaged with her, okay, and then fleeing, what does that say to us? Chadamar mishamtinan le. According to one, we put that man in excommunication, in shamta, okay? V'chadamar iruke mistaye. And the other one basically tells to us that his uprooting, his flight, is sufficient to show that he's trying to get out of the situation of the Yerusim. Hava uvda. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. There actually was a maaseh, an actual situation. Hava uvda, va'amar laho Rafram, iruka mistaye. There was such a situation, and Rafram basically said his flight is sufficient to indicate that it is no longer a valid erusin. Okay, so the Gemara comes back now and comes back to our Mishnah and says Safek ben Tesha. Okay, we're saying is what about the situation of that progeny? Okay, where we don't know whether it was a progeny born after 7 months or after 9 months. That's where we come back. Amarle Rava le Rav Nachman, saying Rabba to Rav Nachman the following: Lema halach acharov nashim. Shall we say then that we follow the example of the majority of women, right? V'rov nashim l'tisha yeldan. And most women, so to speak, in parentheses, normally give birth after 9 months. Amarle. Okay, and so what happens? Okay, Rav Nachman responds, Neshe didan, the Shiva yeldan. The women in our family give birth after 7 months. In other words, the implication is either that's some sort of a genetic or something that they tend to have premature births, okay, more than average, right? So what happens? Amarle, he responds back and says to him, Neshe didchu hava ruba da alma. Are you going to say that just because that occurs in your family, that that's like the majority of women? Okay. Amarle, he responds, Hachi ka'amina. This is what I mean to say. Rov nashim yaldam latisha. The majority of women do give birth at 9 months. Umi'ut l'shiva. And a minority give birth at 7 months. V'chol hayoled tisha ubra nikar. Okay. L'shlish yamah. And women who normally give birth after 9 months, they show signs, I'm going to say, of pregnancy. That's how I understood it. After 3 months. Okay, so that 3-month period should really give you, or 3 month plus a little bit, should be able to tell you for sure whether she's pregnant or not. Okay, Vizo, and in this case, ho'il, right? Ho'il velo hukar ubra l'shalish yameha. Since in this case, it's not seen that she has an embryo, in other words, that she's pregnant, okay, for a third of her days, in other words, 1/3 of the period of her pregnancy time, itra le ruba, then we have to compromise on the situation of the majority. Ikol hayoldot letisha ubra nikar l'shlish yameha. If we're going to say that most women given birth, okay, at 9 months begin to show their pregnancy at least 1/3 through the pregnancy. Midelohu kar l'shlish yamaha. Here, since it was not shown a third of her pregnancy, let's say at that time, ubra vadai bar shiva librata, then in that case we should be able to assume that the pregnancy is as a result of the latter, the second husband. Okay, all right, and that's being the case. Ella ema, but I might say therefore the following: Rov hayolodot l'tisha ubrani kar l'shlish yomeha, that the majority of women who give birth at 9 months, right, their pregnancy is visible a third of the way through their term, right? V'hai midelohu kar l'shlish yomeha. And in this case, where we don't see, okay, by the third of the pregnancy, okay, right? Itra le ruba. Then again, we have to compromise and say this is not an example of the majority of women, okay? That's basically just another, that Ella is just another way of rephrasing the point, okay? And how would you know then, based on when she starts showing, could you tell then whether the pregnancy was due to the earlier husband, the deceased husband, or whether it was the new husband in that situation? Okay, Braita, new Braita, Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, let's assume, says the Braita, that someone went ahead and had relations with this woman. Okay, right? What happens if it's the Yabam? Okay, and it's done properly. All right, and the Yabam happens to be a Kohen. Okay, in this case. All right, and it's done according to what's appropriate. Rishon Ra'ui Liot Kohen Gadol. Then it's possible that if the Yabam was a Kohen, the progeny is a valid progeny, okay, valid Yibum, okay, and what happens? He theoretically could even be Kohen Gadol. He's kasher, all right, and so on. However, what happens if he has relations with that woman, his Yavama, a second time? Is he still fulfilling Yibum? Okay, no way, right? His whole purpose of the Doraita was to fulfill the fact to make up for a child that the brother didn't have. Okay, and when we said it was Al Shem Achiv, okay, remember we had an argument, did it really mean you have to name it, the child with that name? No, not necessary, but it was to produce an heir, okay? That was the whole point. And so in this case, what happens if he has relations with her a second time, okay, there's a problem.
Does that mean he can only have relations with her once and that's he has to divorce her after that?
You can only have one child.
Or just,
Okay. if he's not a Kohen,
Yes.
right? All right, then he would have to, that's a good, okay, what?
Separate.
He would have to separate from her, okay? He's done Yibum. At that point, she is sort of marketable. I'll put it that way. He then, if he's not a Kohen, he could marry, right?
In other words, she's available to everyone then,
Yeah.
after the first,
After Yibum has been fulfilled.
and then the Yavam doesn't have to do anything?
No, it says that she had relations within 3 months before they were able to determine that she was pregnant. So once they find out that she's pregnant, it's to be a Kohen because the dead brothers have to be a Kohen.
Right,
That's what
right,
he's supposed to.
right.
But since it's a suffix Yibum, if we had to.
Well, I don't know if it's a suffix here.
It has to be, otherwise what's the
Let's
suffix
see.
gonna be?
Let's see,
Within 3 months.
all right? I think it's during the time
In
period,
a 3-month period.
okay?
Because
That's
if the
it.
child that's born is the child of the first husband, so then there's nothing wrong with him.
Right,
Right?
If the
And
child is
and
a-
if the first husband did not have any children,
right,
and this is the child of the second husband, is the brother, so there's also nothing wrong with him.
right. But
But the second child, since we don't know what
if he goes ahead and
Right.
he's done Yibum,
first child was a suffix, we don't know who the father was. But
well, we're gonna
as long
get
as
to that
Right.
shortly.
But the second child then would be a suffix mamzer.
Okay, well, we'll see. Usheni says the Gemara Mamzer. That second child, okay, if he's done Yibum and she theoretically should be available, right, marketable, all right, then the fact that he continues to have her, as how I understood it, okay, that's one as a Mamzer. Misafek, he is questionable.
Maybe you shouldn't have done even just this first child may have been the child of the first one. so that's an
Exactly.
Asher suffix.
That's the point. Now, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Ein Mamzer Misafek. We do not make somebody the status of a Mamzer when out of doubt, right? My Kamar, what is he really saying here? Amar Abai, Hachi Kamar, this is what he's saying. Rishon Ra'oi Liot Kohen Gadol. The first, when it's a valid Yibum, okay? In that case, if the brothers were Kohanim, and the one brother died and the other brother Kohen, okay, had done Yibum with him, then that child in theory, right, could be even ultimately Kohen Gadol,
Also means if it's a girl, she could marry a Kohen Gadol.
right? Usheni Safek Mamzer. And the second one, okay, is a questionable status as a Mamzer, because we don't know for sure, okay, what the situation is, right? Namely, Va'asur b'mamzeret. And he also would be, okay, not allowed to marry a mamzeret either, right? Okay, because if he's a Jew, he's not allowed to marry a mamzeret. Okay, and if he's not a Jew, if he's a mamzer himself, okay, even then, because he's a suffix, he can't marry either a Jew or a mamzer. So he's really out of luck, right? Rabbi Elazar Omer, he says, ain't no suffix mamzer, elavadai mamzer. Okay, rather, according to Rabbi Eliezer, there's not a doubt here in his status, but that he's clearly a mamzer, umutar b'mamzer. And if he's clearly a mamzer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he certainly can't marry a normal, so to speak, Jewish woman, but he could marry another mamzeret, because then his progeny ultimately can come back into Jewish people, right? Rava Amar, says Rava, Hachi Kamar. No, this is what he meant to say. Rishon Ra'oi Liot Kohen Gadol. The firstborn, okay, in that situation, could be a Kohen Gadol. Usheni, and the second, Mamzer Vadai Misafek. Okay, he certainly could be a Mamzer, but his status is still questionable, right? Umutar b'mamzeret, and he should be permitted to marry then a mamzeret. Another example. For Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Ein vadai mamzer misafek. We don't say that one is certainly a mamzer when in a doubtful situation, right? Ela safek mamzer va'asur b'mamzer. But we might say his mamzer status is questionable, and therefore, for that reason, he's also forbidden to marry a mamzer. Okay, so what happens? Ukemiflagei k'de Rabbi Eliezer, and they disagree b'divrei Rabbi Eliezer in terms of what Rabbi Eliezer meant by his remarks. Ditnan. Why? Because Rabbi Eliezer said the following. All right, vada'an b'vada'an mutar. If one is clearly, I'm going to say it this way: if their status is clearly known, they are able to marry somebody whose other status is clearly known. Okay, that's permitted. Vada'an b'safkan, v'safkan b'vada'an. If one's status is clear and one's status is doubtful, or one status is doubtful and another status is clear, or v'safkan b'safkan, or one status is questionable and another status is questionable. In all of those three cases, asur, then they're prohibited. Okay? So what are we talking about here? Ve'elu hein safkan. And the Braita continues and clarifies Rabbi Eliezer's remarks. These are the ones we say whose status is questionable. Number one, a shtuki, that's somebody who is of unknown paternity. Number two, va'asufi, that's a foundling, right? Number three, kuti, okay? Because the question, remember, of whether the kuti was going to be considered actual Jews or not. Chazal were disagreed on that. Va'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Says Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, halacha ka Rabbi Eliezer. The law is like Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer is really very makpid on one's yichus in terms of who they can marry and who they're not permitted to marry. Okay? All right. So says the Gemara, Ki amrita kame dishmoel, Amarli, when I said this, right, and I assume when it says I said this, okay, it comes back to since it was said, Rav Yehuda, okay, not Rav Yehuda, okay, it said that Rav Yehuda said this before Shmuel, but he cited the view of Rav, okay? Shmuel's response, he says, is as follows. Okay, he's going to disagree. He's going to tell us, Hillel Shana Asara Yuchsin Alumi Bavel. Hillel taught that there were 10 family statuses, okay, that came up in the Shivat Sion when it came from Babylonia back to Eretz Yisrael. One, Kohane, you had Kohane. Levaye, number two, you had Levim. V'Yisraeli, you had Israelites, that's 3. Chalale, that's 4. Those were inappropriate births, okay, in terms of Kohanut. Gere, that's converts, right? That's another one. Charure, that's those that were mishtachrer. Those were former slaves that now were free. Mamzere, Netine, okay, those were another group, right? Back from that time from Yoshua, right? Shtuke, again, we have the shtuke, the unknown paternity, va'asufe, and foundlings, v'chulan mutarim lavo ze bazeh. And they were all allowed to marry one with the other. V'at amart achek Rabbi Eliezer, and you're saying law is like Rabbi Elazar. How can that be? That's the view of Shmuel. Abai savarla kishmuel. Abai held like the view of Shmuel, the Amar halacha Hillel, who said the law was like Hillel. Umokela Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov aliba de hilchata. Okay, and they understood that when it was said that the law was like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, all right, aliba de hilchata, hihechi de lo tikshe hilchata al hilchata, so that there would not be a disagreement with one law confronting another law. Okay, hihechi de lo tikshe hilchata al hilchata, and so that again, that's what we said. Rava, on the other hand, savala kirav. He held like the view of Rav, right? The Amar halacha Rabbi Elazar, who said the law was like Rabbi Elazar. Umokela the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and he held it according to the view of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, aliba de hilchata, according to that halacha. Right? So the Gemara says at that point, ki hechi de lo tikshe hilchata ahilchata. So how is it possible then that we would have a situation so you wouldn't have the law according to one conflicting with the law of the other? Amar Abaye, says Abaye, mina aminala. The kol sfeik of the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, kivadai mashvele. How is it that it's possible that I say, says Abaye, that a doubtful mamzer, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, is considered equated, I'm going to say for the moment, as a valid mamzer, to Tanya, because we have a bright. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, he says as follows, Harei sheba al nashim harbe, ve'ein yodea al eza mehen ba. One who had relations with multiple women, and he doesn't know with whom he had relations. Okay, pretty active guy. Wait, the flip side now. V'chein he, and likewise her, sheba'u aleha anashim harbe, who had relations with multiple men, ve'ena yodat me'eze mehen kabla, and she doesn't know from which one of them, okay, she received. In other words, from which one of them she could have conceived. Okay? Nimtza av noseyed bito. The result could therefore then be, under those multiple pregnancies and births, a situation, what? All right, a situation where a father could actually marry his daughter, okay? Or va'at noseyet achoto, or a brother could marry his sister, okay? If she had multiple pregnancies from different men, okay, that could be the situation. And what happens? V'nit malei kol ha'olam kulo mamzerim. Okay, and it would just make a plethora of mamzerim, all right, in this situation. Va'al zen ne'amar, and about this it was said, umala ha'aretz zima. Okay, and that's where the pasuk says that the world was full of promiscuity. Okay, so that would be the basis that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov could argue that if it's a questionable mamzer, he's going to treat it like a vadai mamzer. Okay, to prevent the profusion of mamzer. Right? Exactly, Ruvain. Good to see you. Varava Amala. Rava would argue back the following. Hachikama. This is what meant. When we had the word zima in the pasuk, zo ma hi. Okay? He understood it as an abbreviation. Okay? What's going on here? Okay? Yeter al kain, and even more so. Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov the following: Lo yisa Adam isha b'medina zo v'yelech v'yisa isha b'medina acheret. A person should not go and marry a woman in one locale, I'm going to say, and then go and marry a woman in another locale, right? Shema yizdavgu ze laze v'nimtza et nosei et achoto. Lest it happen that this one join up with meat, okay, with the other, and one would wind up marrying, right, his sister. Okay. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. Aini, is that really the case? Okay. I'm going to give you two examples. Okay. Says the Gemara in a moment, that we question where you say a person can't marry more than one woman in different locations. Vaha Rav ki ikla ledar, right? Ki ikla ledar dasheya. Okay? When Rav would come to a location like Dardasheya, Machriz, he would announce and say, Va'amar, man havya liuma. Who is going to be my, there used to be a show, Queen for a Day. So this is my wife for a day. Okay? That was the thought that came to my mind. Okay, who's going to be my wife? What?
You have to give her a get by midnight?
Well, wait a second. That's a good question. We'll come back to that. So, and not only that, did Rav do that? V'Rav Nachman, ki ikla l'chnatziv, when he came to the town of l'chnatziv, okay, another distant town, Machriz, he would v'amar and say, man havya leyoma, who's going to be my wife for a day? Okay. So what happens? Notice what the Gemara says. Shani Rabbanan, the Pakia Shamayhu. Okay? The rabbis are different because their names are renowned. In other words, if for some reason he were to have relations with that woman and she were to get pregnant and they were to have a son, they would clearly know the paternity of that child. Okay, or the daughter, right? Okay,
Assuming she didn't have relations with anyone else.
right. Well, maybe she, maybe there was a status issue there too. Who knows? Okay. V'ha'amar Rava. But wait a second, says the Gemara. Didn't Rava say as follows? Tiva'uha linaseh v'nit paisa. Okay, that he would demand or he would request someone to marry, and they accepted. Tzricha leshev shivat nikiyim. That before she could marry, she had to be sure that she wasn't in nida, and so she would wait 7 days. How would it be possible then for one of the rabbis to come and marry her on the spot, so to speak? Rabbanan. So the answer is Rabbanan shluchaihu havu mishadade. The rabbis, they knew they were going to arrive in that town a week in advance, and they would send
They're messengers.
messengers. Exactly, they would send representatives that would arrange the shidduch, okay, for that. All right, umod elahu. And the representatives would announce that they would be coming. Ve'ibayat ema. And if you want, I would say the following. Rabbanan yichude ba'almahu, the miyachte lahu. That these rabbis were so unique, special, okay, that they would only be alone with the women, but they would not have relations with them. Okay? That was one page that I saw. All right. In other words, what happens? The Amar Mar. Okay, and here is one of the best quotations throughout the entire Gemara. All right. As the master says, Eino domer mi sheyesh lo pat besalo lamisha aim lo pat b'salo. One who has bread in his basket is not the same as one who doesn't have bread in his basket. Okay, if it's available, all right, that's the case.
But how does that affect the woman when he leaves the town? She's not,
So your question and Steve's question is exactly the same point. Is it appropriate to marry the woman only for a day? Okay, right? What would he have to do? He would have to give her a get when he left, right? So now the Gemara is going to challenge that whole idea exactly. The question that both of you are raising. Tana, okay? But we have a Braita that tells us as follows. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, he says, Lo yisa adam ishto v'da'ato legarsha. A person should not marry a woman with intent in advance to divorce her. Mishum shene'amar. Why? Because we have a text that says, Al tacharosh al re'echa ra'a v'hu yoshev levetach icha. Right? In other words, the pasuk basically saying you shouldn't plan to sow your seed in your neighbor's field and then get up and walk away. All right? That's the implication. Okay. What happens then? So having raised the question, now we can understand why the Gemara continues now in this next topic. We said that according to Rabbi Eliezer, a sefek mamzer was a vadai mam. On the other hand, we saw the Gemara tell us that there were individuals who held that because of the safek, you shouldn't qualify the status of that person as a mamzer. So we're getting now to another situation. Safek, a person who is of questionable descent. Okay, in other words, we don't know for sure whether, let's say, progeny A is the child of the deceased or the child of the Yabam. Okay. Now, what happens? The Yabam, but we also have the Yabam. Okay, and what happens? The older, I'll call him the older brother, the deceased, okay, has left property. Who is to inherit rightfully that property? Is it the Yabam, okay, or is it the questionable descendant of the Yabam? Right? So that's what the Gemara wants to begin to deal with. So the Safek is a person of questionable descent. We don't know if he is the actual progeny of the deceased or the progeny of the Yabam, okay? And now the Yabam. Shabo lachlok b'miksei mitna. And they've come to divide up the property of the deceased. Safek amar, the one of questionable descent, says as follows. Ana bar mitnahu. I'm the son of the deceased. Okay, in other words, I was born, he was, right, of the deceased. V'nichsei didihu, and the property belongs to me. V'yabam amar, and the Yabam, the Levirate brother, so to speak, says, At v'ra'ai didi, you are my progeny. You're the product of my yibum. All right? In that case. Velit lach velo mide benichse. And you don't have any claim, any valid claim to the property. Okay? So what happens? Have mamon hamutal b'safek. Here then we have an example of money, property that is in a doubtful status. Umamon hamutal b'safek cholkin. And the Gemara's rule is that money that is in questionable status gets divided up. New scenario, right? Safek ubenei Yabam. Now we have one of questionable status, and the Yabam himself has deceased, but he has other progeny. Okay, and so now another court case. Shabau lechlok b'nichsei mitna, and they're coming to divide up the property of the deceased. In other words, not the deceased Yabam, but the
First brother.
the earlier deceased person.
Right.
Safek Amar, the one who was of questionable status, Hahu Gavra Bar Mitnahu. This person, in other words, myself, I'm the son of the deceased, right? V'nichse dedimhu, and it's my property. B'nei Yavam Amrei, the sons of the Levir, okay, what do they say? At achenu at, you're our basically half brother, okay? Uminta huda idlach bahadan, and a portion is what we're willing to give you among ours. Okay? Savur Rabbanan, Kame Derav Masharsha, Lamema. It was thought that some of the other rabbis were going to say and explain it to Rav Masharsha, Matnitni. Isn't that similar to our Mishnah? Okay, which is as follows. Ditznan, as we're taught, who Eino Yoresh, who Ono Yoresh Otam, he doesn't inherit them. Vehem Yoshino To, and they inherit him. Vahacha Ipcha, and here this is simply the reverse. Hatam Amrele, here they can say to him, Aite Ra'aya Vishaku, bring us proof that you're his son, and then you'll take your section. Hacha Amar Laho, and here he can say to them, Aitu Raya Vishkulu, you show me proof of your status, and then you can take. Amar Laho Rav Masharshia, and Rav Masharshia said to them as follows: Mi dame, are the situations really comparable? Hatam, there in that case of the Braita, Ein Hu Vadai. Okay, it's not for sure. V'ihu safek, and his status is questionable. Hacha, here in this case, ide v'ide safek, both his status and their status is questionable. Ella rather, idamya lamatne, if it's similar to our Mishnah, laha damya, it's similar in the following case. L'safek, okay, to an example of one who was of questionable descent, ubnei Yavam, and the sons of the Lavir, Shabo lachlok b'nichsei Yabam gufe, that came to divide up the property of the Lavir himself. Dahatim amrele, because there they can say to him, Aite ra'aya da'achuna at vishku, come and bring proof that you're our brother, and then you can take, right? Safek ubnei Yabam, Shaba'u lachlok b'nichsei Yabam lebatar depalag Yabam b'nichsei mitna. Or we can say it's an example of the Safek and the sons of the Yabam that came to divide up the property of the Levir after, okay, it was divided up that the Levir got the property of his deceased brother. Okay? B'nei Yavam Amrei, then the sons of the Levir can say, Aitu Raya da Achuda Ad Vishkahu, you bring proof that you're our brother, and then you can take. Amar Laho Safek, and the one of questionable descent can say to them, Manaf Shaichu, what difference does it make to you? I achuchin ana, if I'm your brother, havuli matna bahadaichu, give me a portion among yours. V'i bar mitna hana. And if I'm the son of the deceased, havuli palga, the palag avuchan mahadai. Give me half of what your father had received from my deceased father. Okay. Rabbi Abba Amar says, Rabbi Abba Amar in the name of Rab, right? V'kam dina. Okay. He says you maintain the rule, the law. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Hadar dina. Rabbi Yirmiyah disagrees and says, no, you have to review. You have to come back and re-adjudicate the case. And the case doesn't remain as it was earlier. Lema, beplugta da admon v'rabbanan kemiflagei. Let's say then that in the machloket between Admon and the rabbis is what they're arguing about. Ditnan, as taught elsewhere in another Mishnah. Misha halach lemedinat hayam, one who went overseas. Va'avdalo derech sadehu, and while he was away, he either forgot or something, or the area where the land was that he had owned, where he had a path, became overgrown with other produce. Okay, so he now no longer knows for sure the exact location of the path he used to use. Right? Admon Amar Yelech B'Ktsara. Admon says he should take then when he comes back, the shortest path possible. But the sages say, Yikach lo derech b'mei amana or yifrach ba'avir. Okay, namely, he should either pay an amount to buy a new pathway, or he should fly over to get to his location. Okay, Vahavinan ba, and we discussed this. The Rabbanan, according to the rabbis, Shapir ka'amar Admon, well said by Admon. Va'amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav, and Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Hacha b'mayas kinin, what are we dealing with here? Kagon shehikifuha arba'a b'nei Adam me'arba ruchot. It's as if the fact that this pathway that had existed was now surrounded by 4 new owners in all 4 directions. Ihachi, if that's the case, ma'itama da Admon. What would then be the reasoning of Admon that would, okay? Va'amar Rav. And Rav says as follows. Ba'arba'a da'atu mikoach arba'a. You have 4 that come with the strength, with the authority, with the power of 4. Va'arba'a da'atu mikoach achad. Or you have 4 that come with the power, the strength, the authority of 1. In other words, it could have been 4 owners sold to 4 new owners, or 4 new owners that bought the area from a single owner. Okay? What happens? Kuli ama lo plige. Not okay, everybody is in agreement. The matsu madchele, that in those cases they can deter the person who had traveled. All right. What happens? Ki pligi. Where do they argue? Bechad da'ate mikoach aba'a, where there's only 1 owner who came from the authority of the original 4 owners. Admon Savar, he's of the opinion, Matse Amarle, who can come and say to him, Mikom Makom Darki Gabachu. Nevertheless, my pathway, okay, was with you, right? V'Rabbanan Savre, and the rabbis of the opinion, the Amarle, that they could say to him, Ishatakt, Shatakt. If you were silent, you're silent. Ve'ilo, and if not, Mahadar Nashtara, Lemar Ehu, okay, then sort of present us, come back and bring us some sort of document. Velo Matzit la'ashtuye dina bahadayim. And therefore you cannot bring, when I'll say a oath, you can't bring a legal claim against what we have.
We're endorsing blackmail.
Okay, so what happens? Right? In other words, you got to show proof. Okay. Lema Rabbi Abba Amar Rabbanan. Let's say then that in this case, Rabbi Abba said like the rabbis. But Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Admon. And are we going to say that Rabbi Yirmiyah said according to the view of Admon? Amar lach Rabbi Abba. He would say to you, Rabbi Abba, Ana da Amre afilu ka'admon. I could say my view even according to the perspective of Admon, namely, Adkan lo ka'amar Admon hatam, that Admon only said his view in that situation, ela mishum da amarle mimanafsha. Why? Because they could said in either case, darchi chad gabachu, that my way, okay, is simply, how do I want to say it? Is dependent, is directed, is guided through you. All right? Aval hacha, but in our case, mi'ikala meimar hachi, if it's possible for him, is it at all possible for him to say this? We're going to see then how the Gemara is going to try to deal with this question tomorrow, as we'll pick up there with Rabbi Yirmiyah and his view. Okay? Right? Because he's going to flip it as well. Right? Okay. All right, everybody. All right. Somebody leaving today?
In the morning.
Tomorrow morning. Okay, very you too.
I'll be here.
Okay. All right, everybody should have safe trips and enjoyable yontif. Sri, you're going to be back for the last days? Or
Yeah,
what?
I come back Sunday. Yeah.